If you ever visited an African village in the old days, you would notice something. At the entrance, under the shade of a great tree, there were always elders, sitting, watching, talking quietly among themselves. Their eyes calm but alert, their presence steady like the roots of the tree above them. As a child, you might walk past them and wonder, why are they always there? Why do they not go to the farm? Why do they not rest inside their homes? But the elders never explained. They just sat, day after day, morning until evening, and somehow the village felt safer because of it. Tonight, I want to tell you why. I want to tell you what those elders were really doing, because they were not just sitting, they were guarding, they were teaching, they were holding the village together in ways most people never saw. Sit with me now, and let me show you the wisdom that lived at the entrance of every village across Africa, from the Akan villages of Ghana to the Igbo communities of Nigeria, from the Swahili towns of the east to the Zulu kraals of the south. You would find the same scene. Elders gathered at the entrance of the village. Sometimes it was under a baobab tree, sometimes beneath a shelter made of palm branches. But always they were there. This was not a coincidence. This was not random. This was structure. This was order. This was the way life was organized. In traditional African society, elders were not just old people waiting to die. They were the living library, the judges, the teachers, the protectors. And their place at the village entrance was not a seat of rest. It was a seat of responsibility. When a stranger approached, the elders saw them first. When a young person left the village, the elders noticed. When trouble was coming, the elders sensed it before anyone else. They were the first line of defense, the first point of contact, the eyes and ears of the entire community. And because they sat there every day, nothing entered or left the village without their knowledge. Not a person, not a rumor, not a plan. Everything passed through them. And in that passing, they measured, they weighed, they decided. This was not control for the sake of power. This was care. This was wisdom in action. And the entire village trusted them because they had earned that trust through years of service, sacrifice, and sound judgment. Let me now take you deeper. Let me tell you the 3 reasons why elders sat at the village entrance. Not 1 reason, but 3. Because nothing in African tradition is ever simple. Everything has layers. Spiritually, the entrance of a village was not just a physical place. It was a spiritual threshold, a boundary between the known and the unknown, between the safe and the dangerous, between the world of the living and the world that lay beyond. Our ancestors believed that spirits moved. They traveled, and some spirits were good while others were not. Some brought blessings, others brought misfortune. And so, the entrance had to be guarded, not with weapons, but with wisdom, with prayers, with the spiritual authority of those who had lived long and walked with their ancestors. Elders were not just old. They were spiritually mature. They had survived wars, famines, diseases, and loss. They had seen death and still stood. And because of this, they carried a certain power, a protective presence. Their very existence at the entrance was like a shield. Before a stranger entered, the elders observed them. They watched their walk, their eyes, their energy. And if something felt wrong, if the ancestors whispered a warning, the elders would speak. They would ask questions. They would probe. And if the person carried bad intentions, they would be turned away before they ever set foot inside. This was spiritual gatekeeping, and it worked because the elders trusted their instincts, honed by decades of listening to the unseen, culturally. But the elders were not only spiritual guardians, they were also cultural custodians, the keepers of tradition, the enforcers of values, and their seat at the entrance made them the first teachers every person encountered. When a young person left the village to travel or trade, they passed the elders, and the elders would stop them, not to delay them, but to remind them, remember who you are. Remember whose child you are. Do not bring shame to this family. Do not disgrace this village. These were not empty words. They were instructions. They were blessings. They were warnings wrapped in love. And when that young person returned, the elders were there again, watching, waiting. And if they had done well, if they had represented the village with honor, the elders would smile. They would nod. They would welcome them back with pride. But if they had failed, if they had disgraced themselves, the elders did not hide their disappointment. And that disappointment was heavier than any punishment, because when an elder looks at you with sadness, you feel it in your bones. The elders also settled disputes that arose between neighboring villages. If there was a disagreement, representatives would come to the entrance, and the elders would sit. They would listen. They would ask questions, and then, with the wisdom of years, they would mediate. They would bring peace where there was tension. They would restore balance where there was chaos. This is why the entrance was sacred, because it was where culture was protected, where identity was reinforced, and where the next generation was shaped. But let us also be practical. The elders sat at the entrance because it was strategic. It was smart. It was necessary for survival. In the old days, danger was real. Raiders could come. Wild animals could approach. Enemies could disguise themselves as traders. And so, someone had to watch. Someone had to be alert. And who better than the elders, who no longer worked the farms, but still had sharp minds and sharper eyes? They observed who came and went. They kept track of movements. If a stranger entered, they asked questions. Where are you from? Who sent you? What is your business here? And if the answers did not satisfy them, the stranger was escorted out. This was security. This was intelligence gathering. This was the way a village protected itself without walls or weapons. The elders also served as the information hub. News from other villages came through them. Traders brought stories, and the elders listened. They filtered what was true from what was rumor. They decided what the village needed to know and what could be ignored. In this way, they controlled the flow of information, not to manipulate, but to protect, to prevent panic, to ensure that only wisdom entered the minds of the people. The Yoruba people have a proverb. They say, "Agbaki waloha koriomotuntunowo." It means, an elder does not sit in the marketplace and watch a child's head bend. Let me explain. This proverb speaks to the responsibility of elders. When an elder is present, they do not allow the young to suffer or go astray. They do not sit by and watch things fall apart. They intervene, they guide, they protect, and this is why they sat at the entrance. Because their very presence was a form of guidance, a reminder, a protection. They were there to ensure that nothing crooked entered and nothing broken left without being mended. Let me tell you a story. My grandfather once told me about the day a stranger came to his village. The man arrived in the late afternoon, dusty from travel, carrying a large sack on his back. He walked toward the entrance, and the elders were there. As always, one of them, an old man named Babatunde, stood and greeted the stranger. "Welcome, traveler. Where are you coming from?" The stranger smiled and gave his answers, but something was wrong. His answers were too quick, his smile too wide. And Babatunde, who had lived 70-something years, felt it. He did not accuse the man. He simply asked more questions, gently, unagad, calmly, until the stranger became uneasy. Finally, the stranger admitted he was fleeing from another village after a dispute. He wanted to hide among them. Babatunde did not shout. He did not chase the man away violently. He simply said, "This village is not a place for running. It is a place for living honestly. You may rest tonight, but in the morning, You must return and settle your matter." And the stranger did. He left the next day, and the village remained peaceful. This is what the elders did. They did not need police. They did not need courts. They had wisdom. And wisdom, when applied with firmness and grace, was enough. I also remember, as a child, whenever we wanted to leave the village to visit another town, we had to pass the elders, and they would ask us, "Where are you going? With whom? When will you return?" At the time, it felt like an interrogation, but looking back now, I understand. They were not trying to control us, they were trying to protect us. Because if we did not return when we said we would, they would know, and they would come looking. Today, villages are changing, cities are rising, and the entrance of a village is no longer what it once was. In many places, the elders no longer sit at the gate. The tree may still be there, but the seat beneath it is empty. And with that absence, something has been lost. In modern society, we have security guards, we have cameras, we have gates and walls. But do we have wisdom at the entrance? Do we have people who watch, not just for danger, but for the well-being of the community? Some will say the old ways are outdated, that we do not need elders sitting at entrances anymore. And perhaps they are right in some ways. The world has changed. We cannot force the past onto the present. But I wonder, in our rush to modernize, have we thrown away something valuable? Have we lost the idea that the entrance to a community should be guarded not just by locks, but by people who care? People who know? People who have earned the right to guide? In some villages, the tradition still lives. In rural areas, you will still find elders gathering at the entrance, still watching, still teaching, still protecting. And in those places, there is still a sense of order, a sense of safety, a sense of home. Perhaps what we need is not to return to the exact practice, but to remember the principle that every community needs guardians, not just of property, but of values, not just of gates, but of character. So as I close this story, I want you to think about something. The elders did not sit at the entrance because they had nothing better to do. They sat there because they understood something we are still learning. They understood that a community is only as strong as its entrance, that what you allow in will shape what grows inside. That protection is not just about walls and weapons, but about wisdom and watchfulness. Today, we live in a world where everyone guards their own door, where we trust strangers on the internet more than the neighbor next door, where we have forgotten that the strongest security is not technology. It is relationship. It is the presence of people who care enough to sit, to watch, to ask, to guide. The elders knew this, and they gave their final years not to comfort, but to service. They sat in the heat. They sat in the rain. They sat through boredom and fatigue because they understood that their presence mattered. And maybe, just maybe, we need to ask ourselves, who is sitting at the entrance of our communities today? Who is watching? Who is guiding? And if the answer is no one, then perhaps it is time we take a seat. The tree is still there. The question is, will we sit beneath it? Now I ask you, do you remember elders sitting at the entrance of your village? Or maybe your grandmother or grandfather told you stories of what the elders used to do. Maybe you come from a place where this tradition still lives. Share your story in the comments. Tell me what you remember. Tell me what you have seen, because these memories, these practices, they are not just history. They are lessons for today. And if this story touched you, if it made you think, follow Roots of Africa. We are here to keep the wisdom of our ancestors alive, to honor the elders, to remember what mattered then so we can build what matters now. Until we meet again, may you always have wise guardians at your entrance, and may your heart always remain open to their guidance. Go well.
Kadake vukunku jekono.